I'm Larry Larkin. Today's February the 16th. We're with Ray Akin, lifelong fourth generation
Yeah.
Rogers County resident. Welcome, Ray.
Well, thank you, Larry. And I'm very happy to be here and to be part of this event.
Well, we're trying to remember and keep a track of our history, and you're a perfect example of
Yeah.
being able to take us back sometime. And before we start off, I did a story with you, I believe, a while back, and you talked about being a paper carrier for Claremore Progress,
Yes.
and you had the downtown.
The downtown route #1.
Can you go over your route? I enjoyed that tremendously, hearing that,
Well, I
and I
can.
think we could do it again today if you were willing.
Well, there were the Progress was they called it the Daily Progress, but it still was only 5 issues, or 5 days that it printed, and they printed it downtown at that time. And if you needed a little extra money or something as a kid, and I started one like the last part of my 9th year, and I kept it till I was 12.
Ninth year in school,
No,
or ninth,
9
ninth
years
year.
old. 9 years old.
9 years old. Okay. Yeah.
And the downtown route was an interesting route because you could run it fast. You didn't have to leave. You didn't have to go very far to get to your route. You were already there.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was in the block across from what's now Dot's Cafe, where the Progress is now. And actually, it had 2 different locations. It was on Dot's side of the street at one point in time, and then it went back to the south side of the street facing north, Claremore's north. So when I was asked to come and talk at a function here at the Museum of History, I asked everybody, what they wanted me to talk about, and they started rambling around. And I said, well, if you just want to know what Claremore's like, you can run my paper out with me. I think I still remember it. So where the Rogers County Bank is now, there's a car dealership there, Parrott, Oldsmobile. That's where the Rogers County Bank
Okay, the
sits.
one that's on the Cherokee.
Between Cherokee and Muskogee.
Okay.
And there was a house at the other end of it and a little commercial building in the middle of the block. So that was the back side of the Progress on the alley. That was the south side of the alley, and the Progress were on the north side of the alley. And there was a little indentation in the buildings where you could pull up and park maybe 3 or 4 cars there, and that's where we get our papers, and the press was in the back of the building. So I'd get my papers first because I had probably 10 newsstands, and newsstands at that time were a big item for the paper. I'm going to guess, and my dad and I sat down once many years ago before everybody left living in the downtown Claremore area, so blocks from what's now J.M. Davis, old Highway 66, and Muskogee, in that area, there were probably about 400 people lived on those 4 blocks in the old hotels and different things. So a lot of the newsstands, were used regularly by the people that lived on Main Street. So I would come out of the back of the Progress and then go west up to Cherokee, and I'd cross Cherokee because on the opposite side of the street, what's behind now Ann's Cleaners, was a restaurant, and it's 2-story. And then,
What was the name of that restaurant? If you remember?
I'd have to go back and look.
Well,
I've thought
I
many
tried to
times.
remember it. I cannot.
Yeah, that would have been the very first when you moved here,
Yeah.
and that would have been the last. And then to the south of that was the Bungalow Bathhouse, just to give you a reference. So I'd go over there and hit a newsstand, and the waitress would buy a paper. Then I'd come back across the street and just go down the west side of the Masonic building up to 3rd Street, Will Rogers, then turn right, and then go up to Twin Oaks Hotel, and then go down to Lincolnfelder's DX, then across the street. And I'd
Now,
drop
you're delivering papers the whole time.
yeah. I had probably on a daily, on Sundays I knew I had 150 papers, but of course it's Claremore Progress. Yeah. And I had 150 papers because you drop off the newsstands, 10 in one, 15 in another, 20, and those types of numbers of papers. Now the Progress newsstand I didn't furnish. They did that themselves. That was right in front of the Progress. So I probably had about 30 accounts as far as individuals that lived in the old buildings and things. But you dropped off a bunch of papers, people would just buy the paper every day. For example, streeter cleaners, L. Ting Streeter, he'd buy a paper, or the shop would, or somebody in that shop.
And they sold for what?
Nickel.
Nickel.
And
Okay.
typically everybody would give you a dime. And a nickel back then was a lot of money. So you'd go down the street, I'd be going now west on Main Street, and you'd pass Doc Anderson's office, which was there, which became the Claremore Police later. Had a hotel above the corner building, a Streeter's Cleaners, and I'll come up with the name of that in a minute. That's how your brain works nowadays. But, I'd go down and I'd drop a paper off at, sometimes at Smut Beards. Had a little narrow piece of property there, and if Smut wasn't cutting hair, he was laying in the chair asleep. That's Bill Beard's grandfather. And then past Nell's, which is now Dots, and then furniture stores, and then my real first newsstand was Bell's Confectionery, which behind that was the Cardinal Lounge. And I would go down that street a half a block and drop a paper off at Glencliff, which was half a block off Main Street.
And was your dad's shop?
Right across the street, my grandfather's and dad's.
His grandfather's first. Okay,
Yeah,
we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes.
And then just basically back up to Main Street, and I'd run up the Columbia building, which burned, many years ago, where Heinz Jewelry was, and there was a grocery store on that corner. And then down to the Missouri, and dropping papers off, not particularly newsstands. Then from Missouri, I'd go north to Roy's Cafe and drop newsstand papers off. Then I'd go to the Warehouse Market, which was a little further north, and then start going back to the west. And that was the biggest newsstand I had, was Warehouse Market. Like on a Sunday, they'd get 20 or 25 papers.
Now, that is the Main Street Tavern then?
No, it was Safeway when I was a kid.
Right.
But I did not drop any papers off at Safeway.
Okay.
But the Warehouse Market then was where the tin box is now, and it
Right,
faced
Warehouse
north.
Market, I'm sorry, yes.
It faced north, and that was my furthest north point. Then I came back up and didn't really have any papers to drop off until I got to the alley behind the Mason Hotel. And then I'd turn down that alley, and Ray's Printery was in that alley. And then I'd go to the other end, cross over the street, and go to Cops Cafe, which was on the south side of Main Street, across from the Mason Hotel, and another newsstand. Then I'd come back across, and there were probably 7 or 8 businesses in the Mason Hotel Annex. That's a 2-story part. They annexed it, I guess that's what I was told, in probably 1930. The original was the 3-story part, okay? And Mason Dress Shop ran by Burma Duran. Foster Twist was a barber shop. He'd take a paper. And then I'd go into the Mason Hotel, which was another newsstand. And Mrs. Davis, first name, I'll come up with it. But her and JM would always be at the counter. And then usually somebody in that lobby would buy a paper. And then when I did that, I crossed the street and went to the Will Rogers Hotel, dropped off newsstand. Then I ran up to the mezzanine floor and east. I went across the street, and my first was the Claremore Bakery, which had moved from where Ann's Cleaners is down in a couple of years when I started. And then the Berwick Hotel, 3 stories. 3 stories up, I had a customer, you know. And those stories were long. They were 14-foot ceilings and 10, 12-foot ceilings. You probably had about 40 steps to get to the third
I
story.
remember going up to Dr. Gordon's office.
It's still that way when you go up there to get a drink today.
Yeah.
But then I'd head down to picking up different individuals to the corner of the Sequoia Hotel where the First National Bank was. Mr. Burgess Barbershop would turn the corner and there were 2 or 3 businesses in front of the Yale Theater on Missouri. Then cross the street and back up in front of Doc Cahoe's. I'd run up there and drop a paper off, and Chastain's, which was C.R. Anthony's, and Penny's. Then the Woolworth Hotel, which is pretty rough, over Penny's. And then I'd wind up dropping a paper off to Albert Cloninger at the Western Auto, and that was it for my route.